You were made for enjoyment, and the world is filled with things you will enjoy, unless you are too proud to be pleased by them. A feeling, traceable in several of William Turner's former works, is an acute sense of the contrast between the careless interests and idle pleasures of daily life and the state of those whose time for labour, or knowledge, or delight is past forever. There is evidence of this feeling in the introduction of the boys at play in the churchyard of Kirkby Lonsdale. I suppose few men now living have so earnestly felt, none certainly have so earnestly declared, that the beauty of nature is the blessedest and most necessary of lessons for men, and that all other efforts in education are futile till you have taught your people to love fields, birds, and flowers. The very quietness of nature is gradually withdrawn from us. Thousands who once in their necessarily prolonged travel were subjected to an influence from the silent sky and slumbering fields, more effectual than known or confessed, now bear with them even there the ceaseless fever of their life, and along the iron veins that traverse the frame of our country, beat and flow the fiery pulses of its exertion, hotter and faster every hour. All vitality is concentrated through those throbbing arteries into the central cities. The country is passed over like a green sea by narrow bridges, and we are thrown back in continually closer crowds upon the city gates.
It's quite nice to do it in an incongruous environment that's in contrast to the heavy architecture of ZKM. But also it's a way we can commune with nature, I think, as well, with the growing of food and a way of an economy. It's like a little East Schreber Gardens or their own economic system that's done with the sort of, artfulness and beauty and care and consideration that I think Ruskin would advocate for. In fact, he had an idea, I can't remember which text it is in, that every citizen should have a plot of land of sufficient size that they could grow all the food and vegetables for their life, and then also be buried in it. So it was like a complete, a complete system. And that, in a way, that's kind of what these Schreber Gardens are, although nobody gets buried in these gardens, as far as I know.
Yes, and he said, with less no man should be content, and for more no man should long.
There you are. Yes, there you go.
When was your first contact with Ruskin, and what fascinated you so much about him? What did you like about him?
So I kind of ignored Ruskin. I wasn't interested in him because I was interested in contemporary art mostly, and the new and so on. So I didn't take much interest. But it was only really later, when I was working in the Lake District, in this mountainous kind of beautiful area of England, where we were running a artist residency program from a farm on the top of a mountain top. I realised this is where Ruskin lived, and in fact, this Branchwood, this is the house. This is Ruskin's house on the shore of Lake Coniston. And above this house where he lived, there was a medieval farm, which is where our operations were, our office and our residency program. And so it was really this proximity to Ruskin made me kind of be interested and look at him again. But it was only really when we started doing projects in the local village, and there was this institution called the Coniston Institute, which was like the village hall. And then it was really through that I discovered that Ruskin had made this institute. He had created it, and it revealed itself, the history revealed itself that it didn't used to be a village hall. It was this educational institute where all the miners, the farmers, the people who lived in the village had this centre which was about learning about art and embedding art in day-to-day society. And suddenly I started, the world of Ruskin opened up in a very different way, and it connected a lot with, interestingly, with ideas that we'd been testing, which was this idea of making art useful. Again, reintroducing use value into art as an equation to break away from the kind of modern paradigm, or the modern art as it's been fixed for 200 years. And so, looking back at these figures, these people who were saying other things, who were proposing a different way for art to work, and having huge influence, this was really what was revealed to me. And then I just kept digging and digging, and found more and more about him, and became rather fascinated with him. Yeah.
And did he also know about the farmhouse?
He did. So Ruskin, because he did many different things and did sort of social experiments and projects, and he was very interested in nature and food and how the population should be fed. It was a complete economic system that he really was espousing. And he used to do experimental agriculture projects around his house, but then up the hill. And then there were tenant farmers who rented the farm. That's how farming works. And he used to walk up and have breakfast with them every day. But so he could sort of be a farmer and live like a farmer and understand how they were, and do little sketches of sketches of them at work. And in fact, one of the sons on the farm, he injured himself with a scythe, when he was haymaking, and became really ill. And Ruskin became rather sort of fascinated with this, kind of looking after this boy who'd been injured. And sadly, he died from this incident, and Ruskin kind of documents it as a sort of travesty. Yeah.
How would you describe his character from what you read about him?
He sounds really difficult and quite unpleasant. I mean, he doesn't sound like a particularly nice person at all, and he was incredibly problematic. He fell out with people who didn't, do things the way he saw them. Yeah, I think he was. I mean, he had a sense of humour, and he was social and very, very gregarious. But a very difficult character. I mean, I think he's a curious vehicle for a lot of ideas, but he's also very problematic in terms of his politics, in terms of his kind of attitude to women, and I mean, Victorian society cultivated quite unpleasant men.
Yeah, and how would you describe his style of writing and his lecturing?
I describe it as it's very hard to read for a modern reader, because it's like preaching essentially. He was taught he was hothoused by his mother as a child. His mother would basically get him to learn the Bible by heart. So essentially, his writing style is derived from the Bible. So it has this incredibly sort of complex, over wordy delivery, which gives it a certain character.
I say to my generous hearers, who want to shower Titians and Turners upon us, like falling leaves, pictures ought not to be too cheap. But in much stronger tone, I would say to those who want to keep up the prices of pictorial property, that pictures ought not to be too dear. That is to say, not as dear as they are. For as matters at present stand, it is wholly impossible for any man in the ordinary circumstances of English life to possess himself of a piece of great art. A modern drawing of average merit or a first-class engraving may perhaps, not without some self-reproach, be purchased out of his savings by a man of narrow income. But a satisfactory example of first-rate art is wholly out of his reach. And we are so accustomed to look upon this as the natural course and necessity of things that we never set ourselves in any wise to diminish the evil. And yet, it is an evil perfectly capable of diminution.
It's from 1857, and the Manchester at the time, which was the the heart of the Industrial Revolution. It was really the world's first modern city. Factories, chimneys, production, cotton production, getting richer and richer. And it produced its own great exhibition in 1857 in a temporary glass palace in a park to basically outdo the great exhibition of Paris and London. Manchester wanted to be, the best ever, and they made this exhibition, mostly of art treasures. It's called the Great Art Treasures Exhibition, and it's still on record as the largest exhibition of painting and sculpture ever put on by mankind. And they invited John Ruskin to give a lecture to celebrate this exhibition, and it was at the Royal Manchester Institution, which later became Manchester Art Gallery, where I was director previously. And he hated Manchester because he saw it as this kind of pit of filth, this dirty city that was killing the working classes through hard labour and pollution and everything that goes with industry. And it's the city that really Marx and Engels used for their Communist Manifesto.
I have a quote there: "I perceive that Manchester can produce no good art and no good literature."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he really hated the place. But nonetheless, he rose to this occasion, but instead of giving a lecture on art, he decided to give a lecture on economy. And what he does in this, it's a very long lecture, it was split over two nights of 3 hours each. And this was, he was an entertainer, so the building was packed. This is 2,000 people crammed in to, for this lecture, expecting a lecture on art. And he gives a lecture called On the Political Economy of Art, or A Joy Forever. So it has very long, complicated titles as well. And essentially what he does is he berates the industrialists and merchants of Manchester. He says, you've done it all wrong. You have all these baubles and treasures on display, but they're not worth anything. They have no meaning. You're just using them as a means to power and a means to prestige and your own self-gratification. And essentially the message is art is more than that. Art is a way of working in the world. Art is a way of crafting the world around you, of making a society, of economics being the good housekeeping, as its original definition is. And from this lecture, that then becomes the book Unto This Last. And that then becomes the kind of key text that influences many people and introduces ideas such as minimum wage, social housing, healthcare, all sorts of things. And that influences Mahatma Gandhi in India and the foundation of the Labour Party and the Socialist Party in the UK. Yeah, so it's a very interesting moment where he really makes a claim for an artful way to operate society. As well as hating Manchester, he hated many things. I think once in an exhibition I did a list of all the things John Ruskin hated. Smoking in Manchester being two, but he also hated the Renaissance, the High Renaissance, because he saw that really as a kind of early mechanization of craftsmanship and therefore of society. So really he's looking at the architecture principally of Venice, the kind of early medieval architecture of Europe, distinct from the very precise architecture of the later Renaissance and this the kind of Medici machine.
I shall endeavour therefore to give the reader in this chapter an idea, at once broad and definite, of the true nature of Gothic architecture. We shall find that Gothic architecture has external forms and internal elements. Its external forms are pointed arches, vaulted roofs. Its internal elements are certain mental tendencies of the builders, legibly expressed in it. What characters, we have to discover, did the Gothic builders love or instinctively express in their work, as distinguished from all other builders? I believe, then, that the characteristic of the Gothic builders are the following, placed in the order of their importance. 1. Savageness. 2. Changefulness. 3. Naturalism. 4. Grotesqueness. 5. Rigidity. 6. Redundance. It is true, greatly and deeply true, that the architecture of the North is rude and wild, but it is not true that for this reason we are to condemn or despise it. Far otherwise, I believe it is in this very character that it deserves our profoundest reverence. Wherever the workman is utterly enslaved, the parts of the building must of course be absolutely like each other, for the perfection of his execution can only be reached by exercising him in doing one thing and giving him nothing else to do. The degree in which the workman is degraded may be thus known at a glance, by observing whether the several parts of the building are similar or not, and if, as in Greek work, all the capitals are alike and all the mouldings unvaried, then the degradation is complete. As in Gothic work, there is perpetual change both in design and execution. The workman must have been altogether set free.
So in the early cathedrals of Europe, in this architecture, he sees craftsmen all working together in a much more humane way. I mean, it's a fantasy, really, but this is how he reads it, that the stonemasons are all working together to make the cathedral. And they all have their own independence, and whilst they may be crafting a particular element, a particular stone for the building, they will also, their own hand will come into play, and they will be able to have great pleasure in every single thing they produce. This is a metaphor for how society should work, that you have this kind of idyll of people living quite a humble life, of enjoying making, and whether that's food, whether that's their family life, whether it's cathedrals, but everybody is working with one voice to build society. But within that, they have a degree of agency. They have pleasure in their ability to make, and then that's really that's later transformed in the High Renaissance by a much more kind of authoritarian and kind of industrial machine complex driving the development of culture.
Our architects inform us also that there is one proper form for Corinthian capitals, another for Doric, and another for Ionic. We, considering that there is also a proper form for the letters A, B, and C, think that this also sounds consistent and accept the proposition. Understanding, therefore, that one form of the capitals is proper and no other, and having a conscientious horror of an impropriety, we allow the architect to provide us with the said capitals, which having done, we rest in forced confidence that we are well housed. But our higher instincts are not deceived. We take no pleasure in the building provided for us, resembling that which we take in a new book or a new picture. We may be proud of its size, complacent in its correctness, and happy in its convenience. We may take the same pleasure in its symmetry and workmanship as in a well-ordered room or a skillful piece of manufacture, and this we suppose to be all the pleasure that architecture was ever intended to give us. The idea of reading a building as we would read Milton or Dante, and getting the same kind of delight out of the stones as out of the stanzas, never enters our mind for a moment. Great art, whether expressing itself in words, colours, or stones, does not say the same thing over and over again. The merit of architectural, as of every other art, consists in its saying new and different things. It is one of the chief virtues of the Gothic builders that they never suffered ideas of outside symmetries and consistencies to interfere with the real use and value of what they did. If they wanted a window, they opened one. A room, they added one. A buttress, they built one. Utterly regardless of any established conventionalities of external appearance. All the pleasure which the people of the 19th century take in art is in pictures, sculpture, minor objects, which we enjoy under the term picturesque. No pleasure is taken anywhere in modern buildings, and we find all men of true feeling delighting to escape out of modern cities into natural scenery. I believe the right question to ask, respecting all ornament, is simply this: was it done with enjoyment? Was the carver happy while he was about it?
I believe the right question to ask, respecting all ornament, is simply this: was it done with enjoyment?
Yeah, exactly. It's the enjoyment of labour that he's kind of advocating for. That you should be able to have a society where everybody enjoys work and gets pleasure from the work they do. This inspires, for example, William Morris was a disciple of Ruskin, and he wrote this book, News from Nowhere, which is in fact an early it's like an early medieval science fiction book, where somebody travels into the future, and it's this wonderful medieval society of people, growing vegetables and crafting stone and basket weaving, and everything is absolutely perfect and happy and wonderful. Yeah. So this is what they're pushing for. But it is about actually having your own agency in the work you do, and not to be. And this is clearly against the background of the Industrial Revolution, where people are being used as machines. People are becoming robots, and he's seeing this. So this is the counter proposition to the way he sees, the kind of capitalist revolution turning to, basically killing people, murdering people through work. So he advocates a version of work which is gives pleasure, and that then creates a society where everybody's happy. Which again is quite ironic, because Ruskin never worked a day in his life. He inherited wealth from his father, who was a sherry merchant, and never had to work. So he could spend all his life making art and writing books and preaching. Yeah. Ruskin was what was called an Anglican socialist, and what this essentially means is not everybody is equal, but everybody knows their place in society, and they all get along and support each other really well. Again, it's probably a fantasy if you looked at the reality of medieval life and the power of kings and queens and the court. But that's the idea. So it's quite funny with Ruskin that he inspires and creates the template for socialist society, but he's actually quite right-wing. So he sort of creates socialism by accident, almost.
Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. If you will have that precision out of them, and make their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels, and their arms strike curves like compasses, you must unhumanize them. And now, reader, look round this English room of yours, about which you have been proud so often, because the work of it was so good and strong, and the ornaments of it so finished. Examine again all those accurate mouldings and perfect polishings and unerring adjustments of the seasoned wood and tempered steel. These perfectnesses are signs of a slavery in our England. And on the other hand, go forth again to gaze upon the old cathedral front, where you have smiled so often at the fantastic ignorance of the old sculptors. Examine once more those ugly goblins, and formless monsters, and stern statues, but do not mock at them, for they are signs of the life and liberty of every workman who struck the stone, a freedom of thought and rank in scale of being, such as no laws, no charters, no charities can secure, but which it must be the first aim of all Europe at this day to regain for her children.
He interconnects art and social life so much, and then you talked about it earlier. He wrote this book, Unto This Last, which is not about art at all anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And you recommended it also in the ZKM shop.
Yeah.
Why did you recommend it?
Because I think in this context it's a key text, because you say it's not about art at all, but in a way it isn't a book about art, but it's a book about the art of living and the art of making a society, and making this making this a reality, and in a way crafting the world in its economics, its operating systems, its social systems, in a way that works for the benefit of everybody.
The 4 following essays were published 18 months ago. I believe them to be the best, that is to say, the truest, rightest worded, and most serviceable things I have ever written. The real gist of these papers, their central meaning and aim, is to give, as I believe for the first time in plain English, a logical definition of wealth. Suppose any person to be put in possession of a large estate of fruitful land, with rich beds of gold in its gravel, countless herds of cattle in its pastures, houses and gardens, and storehouses full of useful stores. But suppose, after all, that he could get no servants. In order that he may be able to have servants, someone in his neighborhood must be poor, and in want of his gold, or his corn. He must therefore bake his own bread, make his own clothes, plough his own ground, and shepherd his own flocks. His gold will be as useful to him as any other yellow pebbles on his estate. His stores must rot, for he cannot consume them. He can eat no more than another man could eat, and wear no more than another man could wear. He will be ultimately unable to keep either houses in repair or fields in cultivation. Since the essence of wealth consists in power over men, will it not follow that the nobler and the more in number the persons are over whom it has power, the greater the wealth? Perhaps it may even appear, after some consideration, that the persons themselves are the wealth. In fact, it may be discovered that the true veins of wealth are purple, and not in rock, but in flesh. Perhaps even that the final outcome and consummation of all wealth is in the producing as many as possible full-breathed, bright-eyed, and happy-hearted human creatures.
I think also it because of its influence and its way of imagining the world otherwise. I think that's what a lot of artists are doing now, and we're in a different age now. We're no longer living in this kind of Eurocentric, Western modern ideal. We're living in a very much redistributed world of shifting, economy and power and agency and ability to shape the world. And what I see happening now is artists and also non-artists in different geographies, in different places, in a way picking up these ideas, even if they've never read books like this. But the ambitions are there to kind of use the tools around us, the technologies around us to shape the world in a way that works for people, works in an ethical way. So it's kind of ethical and aesthetic at the same time. So I think that there's definitely a moment now where we could really say that we know capitalism has failed because of just alone of what it's doing to the environment, what it's doing to the planet, and therefore suddenly these texts of people saying these same things in the middle of the 19th century is incredibly pertinent and powerful.
there is not in history record of anything so disgraceful to the human intellect as the modern idea. Buy in the cheapest market and sell in the dearest represents, or under any circumstances could represent, an available principle of national economy. Buy in the cheapest market. Yes, but what made your market cheap? Charcoal may be cheap among your roof timbers after a fire, and bricks may be cheap in your streets after an earthquake. But fire and earthquake may not therefore be national benefits. Sell in the dearest. Yes, truly. But what made your market dear? You sold your bread well today. Was it to a dying man who gave his last coin for it and will never need bread more? In all cases, this is the broad and general fact that on due catalactic commercial principles, somebody's roof must go off in fulfillment of the bomb's destiny. Lately, in a wreck of a Californian ship, one of the passengers fastened a belt about him with 200 pounds of gold in it, with which he was found afterwards at the bottom. Now, as he was sinking, had he the gold, or had the gold him? I presume the reader will see that possession is not an absolute, but a graduated power, and consists not only in the quantity or nature of the thing possessed, but also in its suitableness to the person possessing it, and in his vital power to use it. And our definition of wealth, expanded, becomes the possession of useful articles, which we can use. This is a very serious change, for wealth, instead of depending merely on a have, is thus seen to depend on a can, and what we reasoned of only as accumulation of material is seen to demand also accumulation of capacity. The best and simplest general type of capital is a well-made ploughshare. Now, if that ploughshare did nothing but beget other ploughshares, in a polypus manner, however the great cluster of polypus plough might glitter in the sun, it would have lost its function of capital. And the true home question, to every capitalist and to every nation, is not, how many ploughs have you? But, where are your furrows? Not, how quickly will this capital reproduce itself? But, what will it do during reproduction? What substance will it furnish, good for life? What work construct, protective of life? For as consumption is the end and aim of production, so life is the end and aim of consumption. There is no wealth but life.
So he's thinking about, about labour, about the pleasure of labour, about doing things well rather than doing things badly. And he's then at that time also Professor of Fine Art at Oxford University. So his teaching also starts to advocate these things. He's not only lecturing on art, he's lecturing on politics, society, ethics, and so on. And he thinks that basically that the students should learn these ethics, that they should not just sit and read books, but they should be active citizens in the world, doing their bit, making a contribution. I think one morning he's walking through the streets of Oxford and he comes across a bunch of students and says, and they're all in cricket whites, they're all going to play cricket. And basically he's saying to them, why you waste all your energy on playing sports that will only give you, a tin trophy or an entertainment for half an hour. Why don't we put the energy of our youth, of our young men, into building the world, making the world anew? So he comes up with an idea to build a road, to work with his students to build a road. There are two villages in Oxford, and they're separated by a marsh, which is at the time it's a source of cholera, a source of disease. And also Ruskin is appalled. Another thing he hated, the state of Britain's roads were so terrible. They were full of potholes and very rough. And I think he'd just come back from Italy, where the roads are much finer. So he decides this is a project for the students, that they should build the best road ever, across this marsh to connect the two villages so that the villagers have a healthy life, they don't catch cholera, and the transport system is improved. And in a way, this is an educational tool. This is like an outdoor school about learning through making and doing, about learning the value and pleasure of labour, about how to do things artfully, and how to do things for good, about work should be in support of society. The work you do, the building, the making, should be about what you can do for others. And if everybody works this way, then we have this kind of mutuality in society that takes us to that utopia that William Morris later writes about.
We were coming down the street, a troop of young men, some of them, like myself, only 19, going to river or tennis court or cricket field, when Ruskin, going up to lecture in cap and gown, met us. He seemed troubled and prayed us to go back with him to his lecture, which a few of us did, and there he spoke to us not on art this time, but on life, saying that it seemed to him to be wrong that all the best physique and strength of the young men in England should be spent aimlessly on cricket ground or river, without any result at all, except that if one rowed well, one got a pewter pot, and if one made a good score, a cane-handled bat. He thought, he said, that we should be working at something that would do good to other people, at something by which we might show that in all labour there was something noble. Well, we were a good deal moved, and said we would do anything he wished. So he went out round Oxford and found two villages, Upper and Lower Hinksey, and between them there lay a great swamp, so that the villagers could not pass from one to the other without many miles of a round. And when we came back in winter, he asked us to help him to make a road across this morass for these village people to use. So out we went, day after day, and learned how to lay levels and to break stones, and to wheel barrows along a plank, a very difficult thing to do. And Ruskin worked with us in the mist and rain and mud of an Oxford winter, and our friends and our enemies came out and mocked us from the bank. We did not mind it much then, and we did not mind it afterwards at all, but worked away for 2 months at our road. And what became of the road? Well, like a bad lecture, it ended abruptly in the middle of the swamp. Ruskin going away to Venice. When we came back for the next term, there was no leader, and the diggers, as they called us, fell asunder. Now, I do not want you, believe me, to ask your brilliant young men, your beautiful young girls, to go out and make a road on a swamp for any village in America, but I think you might each of you have some art to practice.
I think they're actually dressed in the photograph. They're kind of in. They don't know what workers wear, so I think they're wearing cricket whites to build this road, which is this irony of kind of leisure sportswear being used for hard labour. So yeah, I think it's a good story. It's a funny story, but it also, in the context of something when we're talking about fellow travellers. For me, this is like a little bit of a personification of that idea, is that it's a group of people who normally wouldn't be connected, coming together around a certain shared set of ideals with an ambition to actually do something in the world, to actually transform the world, to change it, and using the tools, the resources, whatever they have available to make that kind of transformation. And in this case, in the land, to improve the city infrastructure, to improve healthcare, to improve the way we learn, and to do things with an aesthetic sensibility and understanding that aesthetics are really important. They're not just something for individual pleasure, they're there for societal pleasure. It's another way of thinking about aesthetics, that we think about beauty as being something inherent in objects and forms and as being superfluous. But actually this is, in a way for me, his kind of big contribution is to say it is about the ethics of aesthetics, and the fact that beauty is about form and shape necessarily, it's also about the way things are done. There's a beauty in things being transformed in a way that works for people and makes life more comfortable and pleasurable and stimulating. There's a beauty you can apply to anything in life, and it doesn't have to be beauty in the way we think it can be, but it's about how we construct a society worth living in. Yeah.